everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and tonight is night 7 of the 2023 ChemKnits Chanukah special, and it's also my birthday! Tonight I am 40 years old, and to celebrate, I thought that we would dip dye some yarn to break colors. Backing up, color breaking is when you have a dye mixture with multiple pigments and they bind to the yarn at different rates. And so then when you do a technique like dip dyeing, some of the colors will strike and bind to the yarn really quickly, others need more time, more acid, more heat, and so you start to see a separation of those colors. And that's what we call breaking. If the two colors bind to the yarn at similar rates, you'll see sort of a gradient of saturated to pastel. But if they are breaking, one of the colors will start to exhaust first, and it'll shift the proportion of the two pigments throughout our yarn, giving us that color change. The whole process feels like magic. It is so fun. It makes me so happy. And tonight we're going to be playing with a color combination that really surprised me in how well it works, and that is a combination of purple and green. Not all color blends will break. You need to have those different rates that I mentioned, but you can fake a broken colorway by dip dyeing yarn holding onto the same end twice into two different colors. And by changing the rate that you're dipping the yarn, you can get more of one color sort of spread out and one maybe more concentrated at one end. And so this is something else that we will demonstrate tonight to sort of show this side by side along with a color combination that I know breaks. Just like in the other Chanukah videos, tonight we will be dyeing Wool to Dye Force Platinum Sock and DK. This yarn is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon, and I pre-soaked the yarn overnight in some tap water with no acid. We are going to be dyeing a lot of different batches today, so we need to make some 1% dye stock solutions, so that way I can take the little bit of dye that I need of each of the colors for each batch and have it be from the same source. So I put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves. I measured out 10 grams of the royal purple dye to dissolve in a total volume of 1 liter for 1 liter of a 1% stock solution of the purple color. And then I measured out 5 grams of the emerald green dye and dissolved that in a total volume of 500 milliliters, also giving us that 1% stock solution, which is 1 gram of dye per 100 milliliters of water. If I'm dyeing multiple batches where I have more than half a gram of each color in each batch, then it can make sense for me to measure out and weigh out the dye separately. But today I'm going to be doing 0.3 grams here, maybe less. And so it's going to be, and with the number of batches, it's going to be way easier to have the dye already measured in the liquid form. And the reason why we're going to have so many batches is that the maximum number of skeins I ever use for dip dyeing at one time is 2. I find that if I dip dye 300 grams of yarn, the pot is a lot more crowded, it's harder to get even coverage, and also things start to get a little bit heavier and less comfortable, especially if you're dip dyeing for a longer period of time. So 200 grams is fairly comfortable. I can hold 1 skein in each hand and kind of keep them separate if needed. But anyway, I finished dissolving our dye in hot tap water and brought the total volume up to either 500 or 1000 milliliters, and then set this aside so we could prepare the dye bath. In this 8-quart pot, I have 16 cups of water and 3 tablespoons of white vinegar. And to this I'm going to add, it's not warm yet so I can rinse my glove, 30 milliliters of green and 60 milliliters of the purple, and we're going to let this heat up. Now this is double the amount of dye that I used in the Dye Pot Weekly where I originally broke the colors. It may or may not work. I might decide to go back to using this amount of dye for 200 grams of yarn, but I'm going to cover this so I don't lose a lot of water volume and let things heat up, and then we'll come back and dip dye. Woohoo! Hot, hot, hot. Okay, for the dip dyeing, I've got 100 grams of the sock yarn. And one area where this is a little bit different from a full 100 gram skein, since this is a bundle of 10 minis, is that there's the same amount of like surface area, although the mini skeins are slightly shorter than a full skein. But the other thing is that things don't get clumped in the middle as much because there's a lot of separation with the minis. But I'm gonna go really, really slow. This might be too much dye, and if it is, we'll just cut back. So as I dip, I wait until I start to see it under the water, you start to see a different color, and you almost see some greens hit in the yarn, but then it seems like it falls back down. Ooh, I wonder if this is gonna be enough acid for the greens to strike. But see, as I move it in, oops, maybe that's a little too much, but those greens are there. I see them in the water. They're just not striking yet. And we still have a lot of purples. So this might be slightly too much dye. So I don't want to go all the way in because you can see we're getting like awesome coverage all over. But oh, see, that color is so good. That little bit of green in there. It's definitely breaking. But we need these purples to strike first, so that way we can get those greens in. See, haha. So you start to see that little bit of green, but I'm still worried about the amount of purple we have. I need a spoon. Worried is the wrong word. It's just, aha. The water is looking quite green. Okay, my concern is that if I add all of the yarn into the dye bath now, even though we have this lovely, lovely green there, that there'll be enough purples left that it'll sort of overtake it. But we are going to hope. See, the colors definitely broke. What we have at this end is a lovely mint green, and the other end is like a deep purple color. Like those are different colors. This is broken. How much it stays looking broken? Well, that is the question. But I'm gonna let this sit. I don't remember if I added more acid last time, but I'm gonna let this sit for 15 minutes. We'll come back and check in. All right. I just uncovered this. There's still a bunch of greens in here. If I didn't want to use this dye bath over and over, which who knows, I might not be able to. I might need to reset every time, which is a little unfortunate just because it takes a while for a new dye bath to heat up. All right, I'm gonna leave this in here 15 more minutes. I don't think that it'll necessarily absorb, but we'll give this a full 30 minutes. And then I guess I'll bring in a yarn mop. I mean, I should add more acid. I guess I will. This means I'll have to use another dye bath for the next one. We're gonna add 3 more tablespoons of white vinegar. See if we absorb the rest of this green. Maybe we won't do this for all of the others. Maybe we'll use like a yarn mop to help. But I figured I may as well do this before we do our next round. And actually, I'm debating we could do the next round and double the color. The acid doesn't have to be the same, but we'll see if we can clear the green. So 15 more minutes. It has now been a total of 30 minutes, and I'm gonna go ahead and remove this yarn. I would say it's pretty. It's definitely deeper. Ooh, look at that glaze there. We've got some green underneath the purples, but there is still some green in the dye bath, which I'm hoping I can soak up. Because if I can soak up this green, then we can reuse this pot, even though it has more acid, for the 2-pronged approach. But I suppose even if we don't, okay, we're soaking up some of it. This is a skein of Swish worsted. It's 100% superwash merino wool, and we're gonna be using it a lot as a mop. And so already, I'll leave it in here for at least 10 more minutes. Already we've soaked up most of the green so that whatever's left is not gonna make a big impact. And now I just have to decide for the 2-step if I want to start with the green or the purple. The yarn I just removed is super pretty. I just wonder if this feels now more like a navy and less like a purple, because the yellow is toning the purple a little bit. So that I don't know, and therefore I don't know if I want to go back to the previous ratio or what. But actually I might set that up while the yarn mop is going. In my second dye pot, I set up 16 cups of water, 3 tablespoons of white vinegar, and then the exact same amount of dye I did for the first round, 30 milliliters of green and 60 milliliters of purple. All of that is from 1% stock solutions. I waited until the yarn was hot, and then I dip dyed 200 grams of yarn into the dye bath, letting the colors break. As soon as I added the yarn in with the green, I did go ahead and add more acid and let it heat for 30 minutes. I'm still planning to use this proportion of dye on 100 grams for our 2-step dip dyed colorway, but I wanted to do a lighter one just so that way I can decide how we're going to proceed with everything else. With double the yarn, or the equivalent of half the dye, the outside is noticeably more purple, whereas here it is a little bit more blue. And so for that reason, I think I prefer the deeper, because the greens, although the green is darker here, I don't know, I like the seafoamness of it. So yeah, I think for the rest, we'll dip dye all at once, sort of like we did with whatever it is I'm calling number 3, where I have 200 grams of yarn at a time. I have a feeling we'll be seeing this mop around a lot over the course of the video to soak up dye, but actually that worked out pretty well. That was not a lot of color. So I debated which color to do first. The green strikes slower, the purple strikes faster, but let's start with the purple. Excuse Indy. The reason for starting with the purple is because we'll control where it goes, and then we can get more green where we want it, potentially, in the end. And this time, do my toes right? Yes. This time as we dip dye, you can see how much more vibrant the purple is. This time as I dip dye, I am not looking and waiting for, I guess, the greens to appear. I'm waiting for the purples to disappear. And so I remember now that I do want to go slow with this amount. And we do have more acid in here than we had before, so that's something to keep in mind. Of course, the dye bath is looking extraordinarily dark, but you can see things are definitely getting lighter. It just takes a little bit of time, that is all. Oh man. But the thing with breaking is that the pH, how much acid you have in the pot, can be really, really important. Because if I had both of the colors with this, with the equivalent of 6 tablespoons of vinegar, and I'm using 5% vinegar if someone's curious, in 16 cups of water. If I was using, I forgot that royal purple itself might break. If I was using this same proportion with the colors mixed, we might see something that isn't quite what we wanted. There, in theory, we could see the green striking so much faster, so then we would end up with less contrast near the end. But I have a feeling either our purples are clearing, or you can see that it's a little bit more pink. We might be getting some breaking, which is funny and weird because we didn't see this last time. Or at least we didn't observe it, maybe because the greens were still there. I mean, the pink, it's not that much color, but this is pretty funny because I don't remember noticing this. So maybe we didn't notice it in with the green and it just shifted the green. I don't know, but okay, we want to be able to fake something broken. Maybe this isn't going to work with this proportion. I don't know. Okay. I'm going to add the yarn. Let's wait 10 minutes. I'm laughing here because since we have more acid, that could also be causing things to work differently. You see a little bit of pink around the edge here in the pan this time. We didn't have that before. This is noticeably more pink. What? Oh man, I mean the purple itself looks different because the green isn't in there. But maybe, I forget if royal purple itself breaks. Maybe this is something that, again, we just didn't see because of the greens. And that's why those greens looked so muted. So we're gonna give this, let's give it 15 minutes, why not? And then we'll come back. There's still 11 minutes on the clock, and yeah, royal purple breaks. That is noticeably more pink than like a pale royal purple would be. That is cool. But I just dip dyed with the same amount of dye, same batch and everything from a time lapse I showed earlier. And I did also notice the pink around the rim of the dye bath. So just wanted to note that for the record. It has been 15 minutes. And that pink is very lovely. Very surprising. Okay, there's not much in here. Oh, look at that. I know it's subtle, but it is different. And I have seen residual pink in a container from this color, so this is not like that surprising that there's breaking. But this is noticeably more pink and less blue than this pale purple down there. It is a hue shift. It is broken on its own. I'm just surprised because I didn't really feel that pink when we had the green, but we'll see what happens. Okay, bringing in 30 milliliters of our green, and we're just going to take a peek at the color. It is a nice bright green. Stirring this up. And then I'm bringing our yarn back over to start dip dyeing. And now this can go as fast or as slow as I want. Like I could dip this all in and we could create a tonal. Or I can dip it in all the way now, get a little bit of a brighter green up at the top, but then, I mean, I could remove it at this point and go and dip dye it. Or, I mean, I'm looking to see because I'm like, maybe I will make this green a little darker because I have the control to be able to do that. But I'm not limited to what's left in here because what has struck down at one end first. And so in this case, they may end up looking fairly similar. I'm looking over and we did end up with sort of a deeper green. Maybe I should retry this sometime. The side-by-side comparison with less dye. But again, I think that at some point I'll do an official Dye Pot Weekly doing some colorways that don't break if I dip dye it all at once, but then give us something that looks like it's broken if I dip dye them separately. And so that's just the point here, is that when you dip dye into one end, you can get something that feels broken. And notice those pinks we have were completely overwhelmed by the green. And so I think we just never noticed it. Now I am curious that when I eventually put this in and leave this all the way in, if the green that we're gonna get is gonna be darker. But you've seen me here, and we definitely have dip dyed this, so it hasn't just been doing a tonal over dip dye, but that's something also that you can do and can still have sort of this broken effect, broken feel. When I dip dye to break Wilton's Violet food coloring, I pick a pH where the pinks will, well, those pinks strike really fast no matter what, but the pinks strike quickly and the blues don't really start binding to the yarn yet. That lets us capture those brighter blues at the end. But effectively, we are dip dyeing into the pink and then creating, not quite, but almost a tonal blue over it. It's just, it was one mixture that started and we broke those colors apart. This doesn't happen in such an extreme way with commercial acid dyes because the rates that the different pigments bind aren't always at such an extreme difference. A lot of them, even if they do break, have really similar rates, so you don't always get super dramatic results. But anyway, I guess now I'm going to leave the yarn in here for a total of 30 minutes. I will label this yarn number 2, so that way when it's dry, we can take a look and see if we see any differences. But in this particular case, it's going to be very, very subtle. There are other cases where we might get something more extreme, but this is just a different overall technique to dip dyeing yarn first in one color in one end and then reversing and dip dyeing the lightest color in first with the next round. It's just, you know, you're dip dyeing the same end in two different colors. It's just the length that one goes up is a little bit higher than the other, and so it feels like the colors are separating. Okay, let's see. Our yarn. There's a fair amount of green left in here, which is okay. I would say this has a darker green than our first one, but otherwise feels very similar. But I'm now bringing our yarn mop directly over from another container, and I'll leave it uncovered this time because I'll be replacing the water and just wiping the edge before I go and start dyeing more and more of this colorway. Okay, here we have our dip dyed to break colorway, and here we have our dip dyed twice colorway. The deepest color is a little bit more purple actually when I did it twice. I think I was able to go a little bit slower, and so the purple is a little more concentrated at the bottom. But we still have sort of this modeling of both colors in the middle, but then the green is deeper at the end of the one where I dip dyed twice. And so if you want to have control, a little bit more control and precision over those colors, that's the way that I would do it. Now, if we compare this yarn to the yarn where we had less dye, the purple is a lot more evident down here. It may not look it very much in this light, but when I had double the yarn, it is a little bit more navy, it's a little bit more gray. I feel a lot more of the purple here. And in terms of our broken colorways, yes, the green is more vibrant when there's more dye, but it's not that different that, you know, the deeper areas feel more similar. You just feel that color coming through more. So I'll go ahead and stick with a little bit less dye and dye up the rest of our yarn. Let's wash 4 skeins of yarn. 2 of them are darker than the total amount of dye, 2 of them are lighter, and hopefully they'll all have the same 0 bleeding. Because emerald green can be a bleeding color. I just added some dish soap. All the yarn has cooled off completely. I always try to do that even with non-superwash yarn, mainly because when yarn gets warm, the fibers sort of relax and that opens them up. Now, in the case of non-superwash yarn, if you change the temperature too quickly from this relaxed state to then cold, they can kind of shrink back into position but get misordered because of the way they interact with each other. That doesn't happen with superwash yarn, but it's still best to not shock the fibers by going from really hot to really cold. And I'm not seeing bleeding. Wahoo! So I'm going to rinse out the soap, put the yarn through my spin dryer, and hang it up to dry. Unfortunately, I did have to reset the dye bath just because it would have been okay if we had more acid in there, but I want to try to keep things as consistent as possible and get this really beautiful breaking that we have. I'm afraid that it just won't work quite the same way with more acid in there. But thankfully, there's not that many batches to do. Most of them are off camera, but I thought it would be fun to show one because it does feel magical to have one mixture color and then have it turn into something broken and gorgeous. There's one last thing I'd like to do for science. Here we have 16 cups of water, no acid. And I'm bringing over 30 and then 60 milliliters of the purple and 30 milliliters of our green. Now our water now is completely cold. And again, there's no acid in here yet. And we are going to dye some tonal yarn. Here I have 200 grams of Knit Pick Stroll fingering weight yarn. And I'm bringing it in, sort of moving it through our dye bath. We're not trying to dip dye. It's possible we could end up with something that is glazed-ish with some greens going through, showing through. But I really was curious about the average color that we have in our yarn. And it seems to be this purple, which is more purple than the deepest color we see on the yarn, maybe, but also less, I don't know. So let's add 6 tablespoons of white vinegar. 4, 5, approximately, maybe 5 to 6. And the goal isn't to dip dye, it's just to stir things up to create a nice, lovely tonal. So I'm now going to start heating this up. And we're going to heat this for at least 30 minutes. And then we do have some leftover dye that we will be using on our yarn mop. But we'll get to that later. Okay, let's see. Ooh, we've got this gorgeous, very muted, almost grayish purple. This is so pretty. Of course, color wheel wise, if you want to make a purple less bright, add yellow. So adding green is just adding yellow, right? Of course, there is some breaking in here. Just very slight. You can see some of that green coming through. Oh dear. And of course, a zip tie fell off. Lovely. Okay, we're going to put that there and remove the one skein. Then I'll come back for the other. Now, if we really, really wanted to avoid the little bit of breaking that we have on this yarn, then, oh, but it's so pretty, then we should have had it cold in the dye bath for a very long time. But with colors that separate like this, the purple strikes quickly, the green slower, it's hard to do with this combination. But if that's something you want to see me play around with at a future time, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Okay, talking residual dye. We have these containers I have been using all along. That one had a little bit of green in it. The one with purple had almost nothing. I'm going to go ahead and just rinse these syringes out that I've been using for measuring. And then this purple here is some dye that I sort of reserved from washing the funnel and stuff when we made our dye stocks originally. And so all of this I plan to layer on top of the yarn mop eventually. I did one more skein at the double strength because I had an odd skein out. Super pretty, but now we need our yarn mop, or actually, I need to put in the leftovers, and then I'll bring over the yarn mop. Okay, so as I had just shown, this is what was left in the cups from aliquoting out the dye. Rinsing out the cups one more time. It's a little easier to use the syringe in a cup than it is to pour into a graduating cylinder, and so that's just why I did things that way. Here's this residual purple, and there's basically nothing rinsing that, so I'm not going to bother. Now, our worsted weight yarn mop is a very nice light green, and I have a feeling it's going to get a bit more green, but have a hint of purple. Yep, that is my guess of where we're going to be here. So, I am going to get some vinegar, and I turned up the heat a little bit, and I am going to heat this for 30 minutes. And here we are. We have a green with like a hint of purple glaze almost. There's a hint of some color left in the yarn, but we're gonna let this ride. Ooh, you can really see some purple glaze. That's really pretty. But anyway, I'm gonna let it cool, wash it off camera. I just carried all the yarn that I dyed downstairs and had a momentary panic because I remembered that I did some different conditions, but that I didn't separate which ones were which, and so I got really nervous. But past Rebecca did me a solid and labeled the yarn and saved my notes. So I both have my notes and I have the yarn labeled, so we're quite good over here today. In all of the cases, we had a 2-to-1 total ratio of royal purple to emerald green dye. It depended on how much yarn I was dyeing in the same amount of dye. So in the first 2 instances, I dyed 100 grams of yarn at a time in the pot, And then in the third, I dyed 200 grams of yarn at the same time in the pot, which is why those colors are a bit lighter than what we have over here. Now, this first colorway, I mixed all of the dye together before dip dyeing. And so these colors that we see are the result of breaking because those purple pigments are striking to the yarn much faster than the greens. Our second colorway, I dip dyed the yarn in 2 different stages. First, I dip dyed the yarn into the royal purple because I know that that's the color that's going to strike faster. And then I dip dyed it into the emerald green. Yeah, I think normally I might have done the green first, or the color that goes all the way up to the top first. But since I know that the green takes a lot longer to absorb in the end, that's why I did the purple first. Both of these colorways are lovely, but when I was dip dyeing them separately, I had more control here. Because since I could control when and where all the purple pigments bound to the yarn, it meant that I could then go into the green faster, leaving more green dye in the pot once I put the rest of the yarn in. And whereas here, the purples were striking faster, but the greens were striking as well. And so the resulting end color of green, there's not quite as much pigment because more of it, you know, we have the most green here and then less and less and less and less. Here, we also have more green at the bottom and it's decreasing. It's just, it's a slightly more shallow gradient because I was able to dip dye into that second color faster. But I think otherwise, it's a little bit hard to look at the yarn and tell which one is broken and which one isn't. I mean, it's possible we could get something more like this if I played around with the pH of our dye bath. Maybe if I started with less vinegar, the royal purples would still strike, but the greens wouldn't start striking yet, and so we could have more of that at the end. But I guess my ultimate recommendation is that if you want to have something that has this sort of broken effect, and you want to control how much color you have and where those colors land through the dip dyeing, do it in 2 stages. But I'll never get tired of mixing one color together and then seeing it sort of explore in a pot. I ended up reducing the total amount of dye I was going to use, and the main reason why I did that, I think shows up really well on camera right here. Having 200 grams of yarn in the pot, so we're using half the amount of dye here versus here, ultimately did not change the green very much. Yes, the green at that other end is less pigmented, but it still is a noticeable sort of pale green. We see a much bigger difference with our purples. The yarn down here, absolutely dry, feels purple. I look at that and I say, this is a purple and green colorway. This first colorway, there's enough green in there that the color feels a lot more navy. It's still beautiful, and if someone tells you that it's purple, you might say, yeah, okay, I kind of see it. But for whatever reason, it is a lot more neutralized and you're not feeling the purples in there nearly as much, which honestly is very surprising to me. But yeah, that's a bit of an extreme difference between the two. And so I don't know. That is just one reason why I, for the bulk of the rest of the yarn, went for, I guess, our ratio number 3. What differences might you get if you dip dye the yarn versus kettle dye the dye at the same proportions? In both of these cases, I dyed 200 grams of yarn at a time in the pot. It's just in one case I dip dyed, in the other case we kettle dyed. And I believe I started cold with no acid here just so that way I could get more coverage of the purple. I think if I had started hot, then we would have seen a lot more breaking. And we definitely still see breaking in here, it's just very subtle. In both of the cases, the ratio was 60 milliliters of a 1% stock solution of royal purple, 30 milliliters of a 1% stock solution of emerald green. And the color we have here is very purple, but it's a very dusty purple. And really does feel a little bit like some of these mid-tones we have in there. But here you can see we do have some of that breaking in there because there were some areas of the yarn where the purples struck a little bit faster and didn't have as much time to get to some areas. So we see those little bits of green peeking through, which I think is stunning. I love, love subtle breaking like this. In contrast with those other tonals I just showed you, and you can see a tiny bit of it peeking at the top of the screen, our yarn mop is mostly green and only has the lightest amount of purple because that's all that was left as I was dyeing this. And it is also feels very broken, but we need to keep in mind that this is more of a layered tonal, even though the last stage did technically break. But you can see that very light dusting of the purple on top of the green. It's really, really pretty. I forget how many layers this must have gone through. Very, a lot. It went through many different iterations. Oh my goodness. While twisting the minis, I would say that our number 2, where I did the 2 different layers of dip dyes, I felt the deep royal purple there, but number 1 still felt very navy. I feel most of the purple here in number 3. The differences between 1 and 2 are a lot more subtle now that the yarn is twisted up. You could really feel the intensity of the green in 2 being greater a lot more when you're looking at the flat lay of the yarn. And so this is just one reason why I think it's always worth showing the yarn twisted and untwisted. And then of course 3 just looks different. And not just because this is decay and these 2 are sock, but because it has less dye and so the colors feel different. It's really fun to go back and edit these Chanukah videos because often along the way I'll talk about videos that I want to create, and chronologically I did film this before that other video I mentioned I wanted to create, but by the time the video airs I might have already done that. And so that just tickles me because you're getting a snapshot of me in time, but it's not necessarily chronological with the rest of the content that I've created here. I adore color breaking, dip dyeing to break colors. This is one of my favorite techniques and was a huge place where I started dyeing yarn here on this channel. I can't believe that this combination of royal purple and emerald green is one that I discovered by accident. I think that I was dip dyeing a sock blank and I had these colors already mixed and I combined them to create a different color. I happened to know the pigments that I used there, so when the color broke I was very pleasantly surprised and we have this gorgeous combination of the 2 colors. It's just a lot of fun when you make a discovery by accident and then it becomes something you want to go back to over and over again. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and the best birthday present that you can give me is subscribing! Subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a thumbs up. This is the best way that you can help support the content here. Now, I can't say what it feels like to be 40 because at the time I'm filming these conclusions, I am still 39, but I have a feeling it's gonna be really exciting and I will be very happy to start off a new decade. If you want other ways to help support the content here, head over to the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. It's filled with hand-dyed yarn that I have featured in my videos, and it's a great way to help support the production of new videos while getting some beautiful hand-dyed yarn at the same time. You can find links to my Etsy shop down in the video description. And now, do you have any predictions of what will be coming up for Chanukah Night 8? Tomorrow is the last official night of Chanukah, but the ChemKnits Chanukah special will go beyond that. We have bonus videos coming as well, and I really hope you've been enjoying celebrating the Festival of Lights with me. Thank you so much for watching, and happy Chanukah!